In 1828 London, a fresh corpse sold for 10 guineas at the back door of a surgery school. A resurrectionist gang would arrive at a fresh grave around midnight. They did not dig out the whole grave. They dug a shaft at the head end only, about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. They used a flat iron hook on a rope to break through the coffin lid and haul the body upward. The shroud stayed behind in the pit. Stealing a shroud was a felony. Stealing a body was not. The whole operation at a well-practiced grave took under an hour. Britain's anatomy schools in the 1820s ran on human cadavers. Surgeons and their pupils needed to cut and study real tissue to learn their trade. There was no other way to learn anatomy at the time. By law, only the bodies of executed murderers could be handed to the schools. In a city the size of London, executions supplied perhaps 50 bodies a year. The schools needed many hundreds. That gap between supply and demand was exactly what the resurrectionist gangs filled. A gang typically had 4 or 5 men with fixed roles. One man watched the road. One man handled the horse and cart. 2 or 3 men worked the grave with spades, a pry bar and the iron hook. The body was wrapped in sacking and placed in the cart before first light. They delivered before 7 in the morning to a school porter at a side door. Pay for a single body in the mid-1820s was roughly 8 to 12 guineas. That is roughly £1,000 to £1,500 in today's money. For a labourer earning 12 shillings a week, one good night's grave work paid 2 months' wages. Work was seasonal. Summer bodies decomposed too fast to be useful. The trade ran from October through to March, following the anatomy school calendar. The smell was the hardest part of the work. Even in cold months, a body interred for 2 weeks was already far along in decomposition. Men on the job drank heavily to get through the night. Boys as young as 12 ran the perimeter as lookouts. Apprenticeship into the trade was informal, passed between family members or from one gang to the next. The gangs kept logbooks recording deliveries, prices and the names of the schools. Several of those ledgers survived and are held in London archives today. The schools themselves were not passive buyers. Demonstrators and porters sometimes tipped gangs off about recent burials in nearby parishes. The common assumption is that resurrectionists were desperate criminals scraping a living. The records show something different. The established gangs operated more like specialist contractors with regular clients. The leading London gangs set their own prices and refused to be undersold. They negotiated with professors, held back supply when prices fell, and even went on strike in 1826. This was organized labor applying market pressure, not opportunistic crime. The trade ended with the Anatomy Act of 1832. The act allowed anatomy schools to claim the unclaimed bodies of workhouse paupers. Overnight, the supply problem was solved without the need for grave robbing. The established gangs dissolved within a few years. Some men drifted into body snatching in Ireland and Scotland, where the act did not yet apply. The specialist skill of silent, efficient night exhumation was never passed on to a third generation. It was simply no longer needed. What the trade left behind is still visible in the churchyards of Edinburgh, Bristol and London. The mortsafe, a heavy iron cage bolted over a fresh grave to prevent exactly this kind of work. Watchtowers built by parishes who paid men to guard fresh graves through the winter nights still stand in several Scottish kirkyards. The anatomy those schools produced, bought with this grim supply chain, underlies the surgical knowledge still in use today. If a trade from your own family's history has a story worth telling, leave it in the comments below. A gang worked a churchyard in shifts, rarely fewer than 4 men. 2 men dug while one kept watch at the gate, and one held the lantern low. They targeted the head end of the grave, not the full length. A shaft roughly 2 feet wide and 3 feet deep reached the top of the coffin. A hook and rope broke the lid at the head and bent it back. The body was pulled out, stripped of its shroud, and the shroud left in the hole. Keeping the shroud was theft under law. Taking the body itself was not. That legal gap made prosecution difficult and kept the trade alive for decades. Gangs in London sometimes sold the same body to 2 schools in the same week. Schools rarely asked questions about provenance, as long as the body arrived fresh. The Anatomy Act of 1832 finally allowed unclaimed workhouse bodies to be used legally. Within 5 years, the market for stolen bodies had largely collapsed.